Perfect. So, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. This is Cesar Trabanco from the Global Chamber, and welcome to our Globinar on Culture series, Enhance Global Team Trust with Cultural Intelligence. This is part of our cultural series that we started back in January. And the whole idea is for our members, and as everyone wants to do more globally, so we are giving this as opportunities for members to learn more about the cultural differences and cultural opportunities, after all, when it comes to doing business. And today we have Victoria Reynoldson, who is a member from our Global Chamber London chapter. She runs a consulting firm and training firm called Culture Copa, and she can definitely explain more about what she does. And we had a guest from Mexico, Yuri Rangel, and you will be listening from him in a recording because he had a business trip to the US, so he couldn't join live. But without further ado, Victoria, welcome and thanks for your time. And please um, let us know more about what's cultural intelligence and how this can help us with our global teams.
Amazing. Well, thank you. So first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to share and speak today. I'm really excited to be here. And this is a kind of like a group. We've got a few people here, so it's really nice. We can have some conversations. So I'm going to present, I'm going to share some slides, some ideas, but it's going to be interactive. And I'd love to get your perspectives on this topic because I think this is really critical. How do we build trust? Okay, so feel free, like either raise your hand, interrupt me if you've got a question as we go along. We're going to hear from Yuri, also his perspective, and then we're going to have a bit of a discussion around this as well. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, so a little bit about me and what I do. So I'm a communication and cross-cultural coach and trainer. And I work with global leaders and teams all over the world in every region. And I'm the CEO founder, as Cesar said, of this business, Culture Cuppa. In fact, next week, I am 9 years old. So the business is almost 9 years old now. But this is my second career. So I had a 12-year career as well in international marketing. And I work with companies and with teams all over the world, which is when I got my real interest in this idea around how do we communicate? How do we build trust when we're collaborating across borders? I'm a certified associate trainer with the Cultural Intelligence Center, and I'm also a keynote speaker and the host of my podcast as well. So if today's topics resonate with you, then please feel free to come and listen to the podcast. I release a weekly episode every Monday, and the podcast is called Cultural Communication Confidence. So that's a bit about me. But I want us to have a bit of an activity now, which is when I say, how does communication work culturally? What does that mean to you? I'd love to get your thoughts on this. So this is an anonymous contribution, so don't worry about your name going up on the screen, but I'm going to switch screens in a minute, and we're going to go to menti.com. And I would love for you to enter this code, or you can use that QR code, use your phone to enter directly. And you will see there's a screen that comes up. It's asking you this question. And I would love for us to contribute to this. So I'm just going to stop sharing this and move into my other screen so we can see your answers coming up on the screen now. So let me just bring this up. So how does communication differ culturally? So go to menti.com. You can see there's a kind of code at the top here, 28849029, or you can just use this QR code if you have a separate device. And once you're there, you can contribute and you can add your comments. So I'm just going to reload because it looks like something's not quite working there. So hold on, just give me a second. Make sure it's coming up. Okay, great. So if you want to add your thoughts, we'll see your thoughts are popping up on the screen anonymously. I'll just give you a minute to do that. Anybody got any thoughts on this? How does communication differ culturally? What do you notice about how people communicate? So I can give you one example, like the way that people express themselves is really different from culture to culture. So when I think about working with different teams around the world, then we can see that people have the way they express their emotions can be quite different. And like people use different types of body language. Amazing. So we can see some other things coming up on the screen now. So when people have different languages, different approaches, their tone or their tone of voice might be different. Yeah, the words are just moving around. So I'm just going to keep my eye on that. Slang might be different. Absolutely. Facial expressions. Oh my goodness, that is really important. So talking about expressiveness, some cultures prefer to not be too expressive. And actually, it's better to be professional by keeping a very calm facial expression. For other cultures, it's really important to demonstrate your warmth and passion for something by having really strong facial expressions that people can clearly see what you're thinking. People interpret things differently. Yeah. And that's a really big one, right? Because if we interpret things differently, then that might lead to miscommunications or misunderstandings. We see coded communication. Yes. For some cultures and for some people, they have this preference to express things perhaps indirectly, perhaps not always going straight to the point. So this is great. Thank you so much for contributing your ideas about, how does communication differ culturally? And it's really interesting to see that you've already got some ideas around this. I can just see that hand gestures have gone up. Absolutely. There are so many aspects of our communication, not just what we're saying, but how we're saying it, including all the elements of what we wear, how we stand, how we sit, our facial expressions, our hand gestures. There are so many different parts of this. So thank you so much for doing this. This is amazing. It's great to get your thoughts already around this topic. And let's come back to this presentation. So communication differs culturally. I suppose that is the key point that I wanted to get you really thinking about here today. And if we think about the current moment that we're in right now, then there's a lot that goes on, which is really important for us to consider why this is important. There are huge opportunities for us to grow businesses globally. That's why we are Global Chamber members and part of this amazing network. The opportunity to collaborate and build trust with customers, partners, co-workers, to build our network globally is absolutely amazing. But we need to understand that stats say that 70% of international ventures fail due to cultural differences. That is an enormous percentage. So we need to be very mindful that if we are not aware of these, if we don't have the cultural intelligence to move through these, then this is perhaps not such a great opportunity for us. So we want to make the most of this. And interestingly, even in the corporate space, if we are not running our own businesses, if you are listening to this, watching this, and you are working in a corporate structure, cultural intelligence is still very, very important. In fact, 90% of senior executives say it is a top priority when they're thinking about their new hires. So, what do we actually mean by cultural intelligence? Well, I think cultural intelligence is this: it's our capability, which means that we can measure it, we can measure our progress to function and relate effectively in culturally diverse situations. So, it's not just about how we operate, it's also how we build the relationships, it's about how we connect with each other. And that's really important, right? In these days of AI and tech and all the amazing things that are happening in the world, our ability to relate to each other, our human to human potential is more important than ever before. And there are clearly many, many benefits to cultural intelligence. It helps us to connect well with customers, partners, and co-workers. And it helps us understand the nuances of things like, should I shake hands with somebody? How do I create a virtual handshake with somebody? It helps us to collaborate easily within global teams. So this is a reality today. We are often needing to deliver projects with people who are based in many different locations. But it's not just about when things are good, it's also about those challenging times when we need to have the tough conversations, when we need to give direct feedback or disagree or even lead through conflict. This is where cultural intelligence can really help us. And ultimately, it's about building the rapport, the connection factor, and trust. So ultimately, things can get done more smoothly. And ultimately, this is all about growing your business globally. This is why we're all here, right? This is really important to us, whether we run our own businesses or we're working for larger organizations. Now, how do we do this? What is important is having some understanding of what drives and motivates other people. And there are a number of different ways of looking at this. And the way that I do this is through looking at a set of 10 cultural values. Now, here today, in this short introduction and conversation we're having around cultural intelligence, we won't go through every single one of these, but I want to give you some examples of these cultural values and which ones are particularly relevant when we think about this idea of building trust in global teams. So one example is power distance. How do people think about hierarchy? For some people, for some individuals, their preference is much more for low power distance. So what that means for business is that they like to be more informal, more relaxed. They prefer, when it comes to decision making, that everybody has a view and is part of that conversation. When it comes to individuals or teams who are more high power distance in their preference, they prefer to have a clear structure in the way that information flows upwards to be having decisions made. And ultimately, there's usually one or a couple of very key decision makers. And then that information, once it's been decided, is cascaded down level by level. And there is a very clear structure of how that information flows upwards and then downwards again. You need to understand what kind of individual or team you're working with to help you build trust. Are you working with people who are motivated by the low power distance? Or is it really important to them to work within the idea of decision making within high power distance? This is a critical success factor for you. Another example is context, whether people communicate and prefer to communicate directly or they prefer to communicate indirectly. I think a brilliant example of this is I remember quite distinctly, I'm based in London, the UK, and I studied languages. I went and lived and studied in Germany and Russia. And I remember later on in my first career in marketing, traveling quite regularly to Germany and working with a factory and technical team over there. And I remember quite distinctly somebody saying to me once, Victoria, I really do not like your idea. Now, in a UK context, that would have sounded quite direct, actually, to the point of perhaps be sounding a bit rude, a bit abrupt, and even sometimes in some contexts might have been considered unprofessional. But I knew, having lived and worked in Germany for a long time, that actually this was just a usual way of giving feedback. It wasn't personal. It wasn't a personal criticism of me or my personality or what I'd done. It really was just purely about the idea. And so you, again, to build trust with people, you need to understand what kind of communicators are they? Do they prefer this low context, direct communication? Or are they high context or indirect communicators? That means on the opposite side of the scale, that they prefer to give indirect feedback, particularly if it's negative. They like to manage the message through not just what's being said, but how it's being said. So perhaps in the pauses or the silences, you have to interpret what meaning is being given. You might also need to read between the lines and understand it won't be in black and white. in the words that are written on a page in an email, or perhaps in what is being said. So again, trust, very, very important when it comes to context, whether direct or indirect communication. And then the third one is probably one of the most critical ones I want to share here today for trust, which is, how do we build this trust? Do we do this through working together, being cooperative, getting to know each other, understanding each other's personal lives, and getting to spend social time together so that we can really trust each other in this way before we do our work? Or is it more about competitive culture? So, for example, is that about cultures and individuals who are very motivated by achievement, by assertiveness, by achieving the goals? And is trust built through what you deliver rather than through the relationships that you have? Now, this third one might sound like, well, relationships are important in every contact, on every context. It doesn't matter what your culture is. And of course, that is true, but it's about what is the primary motivator. So for people who have this preference for competitiveness, it isn't that they don't care about people and they don't care about working in the team. It's just that they're ultimately more motivated by this achievement and competitiveness. That means you build trust through what you deliver. Whereas for those who are more cooperatively driven, that's their motivation. What's really important there is that they collaborate together, that they build the trust through the personal relationships. So these are just three examples of 10 cultural values that I use in my work. But I think these are probably the most relevant ones when it comes to thinking about building trust in global teams. And what is important is that we need to understand what that looks like in practice. So I'm quite curious. When I put this next image on screen in a second, I'd love for you, either you can type it in the chat or you can unmute if you prefer. I'd love to know, what is the first thought that comes to mind when I share this on screen? So feel free to unmute. You can write anything that comes to mind, first things that come to mind, or you can unmute and let me know.
I would say, I think there's just a few of us here. Yeah, I'll just say inconsiderate, I guess, is my one word.
Absolutely. So inconsiderate was the first thought that comes to your mind. Thank you, Sarah. And what do you think about, what are the kind of perceptions you have of the person? So inconsiderate was one of them. What else comes to mind with this?
Yeah, it's partly my OCD, just being like frustrated it's not parked perfectly in the lines, but yeah, just I guess not caring of others around them, not thinking about their environment. So yeah, just inconsiderate, I guess, across the board.
Excellent. Thank you. So Sarah, that's really great. And it's absolutely an honest opinion. And for sure, this is what most people first think of, very typically similar reactions. Okay, great. So now I'm going to ask people, what are possible explanations for this? What has happened here that means this person has parked in this way?
Maybe in a hurry or late for something, maybe could be why.
Yeah, so they're in a hurry, they're late for something. Great. Thank you, Sarah. Anybody else got any other thoughts about what could be going on here? If you feel free to put in the chat if you're feeling like you'd prefer to do that. I'll keep an eye out on the chat for you. Let's have a quick check.
This is interesting, Cesar, here, because last night I did just that. And so
Okay.
and this could be anyone's situation. Like I went to a pharmacy, and the pharmacy was about to close, and they have this big parking lot. And so I didn't think it was really necessary to follow the rules, because I was probably one of the last customers to come in, and it was like far from the others. So it's as simple as that.
Yeah. And so this is great sharing. Thanks, Cesar. So this is in the context at that point in time, that was kind of okay because it was late and there wasn't like competition for the parking lot. Amazing. That's great. Thank you for
Exactly.
sharing that. Yeah. And then in the chat, poor driving. Yeah, it could be poor driving. So this is interesting, right? We've just come up with some like positive reasons, some negative reasons. Sarah, you said interestingly, they were in a hurry. And I think what's really interesting about that is why were they in a hurry? Like what was going on there? I can see somebody's written unconsciousness of surroundings. Yeah, maybe they weren't aware, but why were they not aware? Like one reason could be they are selfish. Like if I was going to be really negative about it, I could interpret it as, well, this person is super selfish. They are unaware of other people and they just don't care. Or I could say they're unaware or they're in a hurry because something's really happened. Like it wasn't their fault. Maybe this is the hospital car park or parking lot, you know? This is the place. They were in a hurry because it was an emergency. So they had to literally just leave the car and go. Maybe it is somebody who actually needed a disabled parking bay and that wasn't available. So they had to park in this way because this was the way for them to have enough space to get in and out the car. I remember the most creative answer I had to this was that it was snowing when the person arrived and they couldn't see the lines. And then when they came back to the car, it was all melted and they were in the wrong space. Do you see what I mean, where I'm going with this? We can never really understand the full story, but our brain is very good at this. Our brain loves making up what is the story behind what's going on here. Now, this is a simple picture of a car. Let's imagine about our daily interactions, the thousands of conversations and moments when we're interacting with other people, and we're shortcutting in our brain to what does this mean? Positive and negative reasons why this person is doing the things they're doing or why they're saying the things they're saying. Now, this can be helpful because our brain does need to do shortcuts sometimes. But the problem is that when we experience something that is unexpected, different behavior from what we were expecting in that situation, in that context, or somebody says something and it feels a bit off, we automatically put meaning to it. And for us to, particularly in a global context, to work out what's going on, we almost need to hit that like pause button and go, okay, what could the alternative explanations for this be? What's driving this behavior or that style of communication? What could be going on there? And that's the power of cultural intelligence. So thank you so much for doing that exercise with me. I think it's a fascinating one about the power of our brains and what goes on with our brain shortcuts. So how do we put that pause button on? Well, this is for me when we think about cultural intelligence. And in cultural intelligence, there are 4 capabilities, which I'm going to give you a short introduction to here. The first capability is CQ Drive. This is about your level of interest, persistence, and confidence when you're working in global teams. Now, this is really important. I suspect everybody here has high interest, right, in working in across borders with people globally, because that's part of why we are part of Global Chamber. However, to have that persistence, to have that confidence when you don't always know the right answer, or you don't always know what does this behavior mean in this context, this is the challenge. And so CQ Drive or Cultural Intelligence Drive is the first capability. And this helps us when we're experiencing these challenging situations. The next one is CQ Knowledge. This is our understanding of what is similar and what is different between the cultures we're used to and the cultures of other people. This is exactly what I was talking about with the cultural values. Understanding, how does power distance work? How does communication work? Should I be more direct than I'm used to? Or should I become more indirect and adapt myself so that I connect better with the other person? And, you know, this is where we can build up knowledge, but we need to then apply it, because obviously knowledge is based on lots of research. In fact, the cultural values, which I'm using in my work, are based on 20 years plus of research across something like 150,000 data points, but they are, of course, about averages, and research gives us averages of how cultures might be. We are dealing with people, and that's where we need to therefore know how to apply knowledge. And this is where you need to then have CQ strategy. CQ strategy is about your ability to plan and think about what might come up. But then the really, really challenging part, and this is the skill that is great to develop, is super awareness of what is happening in the moment, whether what you thought might come up is coming up, or whether you need to adjust your mental map so that you adjust your behavior and communication to connect with the other person. And it's also about reflection, reflecting on what just happened there. Like going back to the car, why did that person park that way? When we pause and reflect, we came up with some alternatives, some different explanations. And then the final piece, maybe you can guess what it is, but strategies are great, but then we need to turn that into action. So CQ action is really thinking about, okay, I understand my motivation. I have the knowledge. I have the strategy, but now I need to turn that into something I do. And this is where our judgment comes in. What aspects of our facial expressions, our hand gestures, my tone of voice, the way I'm going to say things, what am I going to adapt here to bridge more closely to the people that I work with? How am I going to build trust in the way that I'm reflecting how people prefer to work? This is this piece here. And clearly it's there's lots of different aspects to it, but you've already mentioned some of these when we did the word cloud earlier. So I'm really pleased to hear you're super aware of all aspects of your communication. So there you go, the 4 capabilities of cultural intelligence. How do we apply them? Well, that in itself is a big topic, but I just wanted to leave you today with a few tips and ideas, okay? Some ideas about practical ways you could develop your cultural intelligence when you're thinking about working across borders with people from different cultures. The first thing is to say this, to recognize you won't always have the answer. It won't always feel comfortable because by default, you are working potentially with people and communicating with people who are doing things and behaving in a way or communicating in a way which may be different from your expectations. So it's about feeling comfortable with being uncomfortable. So this is the first point. It's also really important, I'd say, to understand your own cultural preferences and how they influence your own communication. It's often quite hard to see our own culture, to recognize what shapes us and how we are showing up in the world and how we are projecting ourselves. So that's really important to have that self-reflection piece. How do you relate to power distance? Are you more of a direct or indirect communicator? Do you focus more on competitive edge of trust, or do you prefer to build that through cooperation? So really reflect on this. And if you want to go deeper on that, then come have a chat to me about the cultural values assessments. Observe and learn. This is absolutely one of the best ways. When we get into meetings, when we get into conversations, obviously fully participate, but then also have a part of you that's stepping back and understanding what's going on here. How are people demonstrating what they mean through their verbal communication, their voice? Are they speaking quickly or slowly? Are they speaking loudly or quietly? And think about all aspects of nonverbal communication too. Modify your communication. A key part of this is not just the awareness, but then changing what you do. Now, you don't have to change everything. And certainly I would not be advising you to be the opposite of in personality of who you normally are. But little changes, subtle shifts can make a really big difference so that you are bringing yourself closer, bridging to the people that you're working with and building that trust. So that really is the end of what I was going to share here. I'm just going to, I know we got Yuri's video that we were going to share with his perspectives on cultural intelligence. I was just going to quickly mention here, if anybody would like to take the assessment and get their own reflections on their cultural values, where they are with their capabilities today, and have access to their detailed feedback reports and e-learning, then I have a special offer for Global Chamber today, which you can access until the end of this month. So if that's of interest, please feel free just to message me over on LinkedIn. Is probably the easiest way to come and find me on my personal profile, Victoria Reynoldson. But of course, if you are interested in the topics, come and listen to the podcast. I write a lot on LinkedIn and share a lot over there. So feel free to connect with me over there as well. Great. So I'm going to pause my sharing here. And then I think this would be a good place perhaps for to play Yuri's video. And then let's open up and have a bit more of a conversation around this, because I'm really curious to get people's experiences as well.
Hey, Global Prime, it's good to see you again.
Can you hear the sound?
Yes, I think we can. Is it possible to put it on full screen at all?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hey, Global Prime, it's good to see you again. I'm Yuri Rangel, Vice President of Crow EDT Partners. I'm a Senior Global Consultant. And it's great to have this time to share some of the knowledge and understanding that I have found in the world, developing teams here, there, and everywhere. So I was talking with Victoria, and her topic is super exciting. And I think it's just based on how we build trust in the different regions all over the world, understanding the people that we're working with. So sometimes when we are targeting a specific organization, we work with edtechs most of the times. So those edtechs are trying to internationalize what they're doing in some other regions. So part of that is, of course, understanding how they localize their product or their service in different regions. An important key, and sometimes it's something that is not very well received, is understanding the local culture deeply. Part of my recommendations on this is understanding that a deep dive inside the culture, that face-to-face exposure to that, is going to give you a lot more on understanding how you should do business here and there in different regions. So I think in addition to localizing a product, understanding the market and product fit, specifically understanding the business strategy, we really need to start understanding how the relationships at the human level should work. It's not the same, the European perspective, the American perspective, and the Asia Pac or Latin American perspective. In many ways, we really want to go and dive deeper on understanding how they like to do business. And part of that is that interaction, real interaction with the human beings that are in the other side of the region. It's super critical to allocate. So that
I think we've lost the sound.
because a component of your own team is going to be projected to your customers. I have found that building these international teams where we have not only real religions but cultural beliefs and a lot more part of the deep step of understanding of the people requires that the leaders at that level understand and have some cultural intelligence, which means, okay, let's find and try to understand why the people from Spain is so different from the people of the Philippines, and how we can build these transactional teams that are going to start working in a daily basis with all these challenges that refer to their culture, the way we express, the way we talk, the way we receive comments or feedback, the way we approach to different understanding on, okay, I accept this, but I'm never gonna accept that. And sometimes it's as simple as we need to be careful on how we communicate. Part of a successful approach to a specific region, trying to localize your product or service, will be related to this understanding of the culture of the people. And I think it's 100% critical to have that success or lose everything. Your people, your understanding, and the way you can build this communication and interaction among the different teams is going to give you a lot of value, a lot of recognition also, but also this amazing challenge of having that diversity that's going to reach your product, your services all over the world. One of the interesting things, and I really want to put some additional efforts, it's not only about empathy, it's about really going deeper and embracing trust through the real understanding of the people that you have and where they're coming from. And I mean, depends on the region, the culture, the beliefs, the way they do business here and there, and how they can build trust with that. It's not the same a transactional purchase in the United States than a fully relationship growth in some APAC countries with if they don't trust you, they're never gonna acquire something from you. If they don't know you, they're never gonna have business or real business with you. And in order to have this value for your firm, for your organization, you have to interact. And this is something where you can be trained also. There's more natural part of component of people that it's easy going, but understanding how this relationship should work from the very strict procedures that some countries have to the more relaxed procedures and people behaves that are in all the regions where we can find that. I think we really have to develop these skills that are related to cultural intelligence to make it work. Thank you very much. Nice to see you. Have an excellent day ahead. See you around.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that. So, yeah, I mean, I think, that was a really, Yuri, I know, was really keen to be here, and I was really sorry he couldn't make it, but I was really pleased he could share his perspective. And, as his making notes as he was speaking there, the fact he was talking about going deeper than empathy, it's more than just having empathy. It's actually understanding where people are coming from. And that, actually at the end of the day, this is a difference between doing business or not, commercial success or not. So for some people, they will not ultimately do business with you if they don't know you. They don't trust you. They don't actually get to know you as an individual. And so that real sense of knowing people, human to human, is critical in this cultural intelligence piece. So I really appreciate Yuri sort of sharing his perspectives on this. But for me, the richness of these kind of cultural globinars is not just about me speaking, and Yuri obviously adding his perspective was fantastic. I'd love to hear from you. So, Liu, I know that you've got something to add to this as well, this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, it's Liu here. I also work in similar area with Victoria. So I'm an intercultural management and career coach, mentor, and consultant. So to add to Victoria's point, in terms of based on my experience and my clients, how different culture build trust. My experience tells me is actually there are two ways of building trust. One is, like you said, is through relationships go deeper than empathy. But the other is actually through demonstrating your ability. So let me give an example. In my early years, I was in my 20s. I was in charge of the program in Cambodia. Then on my first trip, I went there. There are two types of local partners we work with. One are led by Cambodians, the Asians. Another group are led by expats, mainly Americans. So I have to apply different tactics to build trust with them on my first trip. So with the Cambodians, people don't talk about business before you get to know them. So I actually invited them to my hotel. We had meal together. We talk about anything else apart from work. Your journey in the organization, your life so far, and then the day or so later, then we go to the office to talk about work. While it's the opposite to expat-led organizations, they took me straight to their office because I was in my youth, I was in my 20s. So they literally gave me like an interview. They want to, they ask me all the hard questions. What they want to know is that what qualifies you to lead the program here to work with us. So then once they are satisfied at that level, then they're okay. So the trust is built through different way of interaction. Is through demonstrating the capability, another is through demonstrating the connection and relationship at the human side. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think what's interesting about that is the short-term and long-term implications of that, because I think when you're, as long as you are delivering and achieving for people who have that preference for that type of culture, actually that works. But as soon as you stop achieving or it doesn't, results are not coming through, that trust factor can be lost very quickly. But in more relationship-based cultures, actually that trust is has longevity and it continues. So it takes more time to build up the trust to begin with, but then it lasts. And that's again a very different approach. Whether that's thinking about how we work with global teams, or whether even we think about how talent is managed or how employees are managed in redundancy situations. So I think that's a brilliant example. So thank you for bringing that really, really live example from your own experience. Thank you. Who else would like to share and contribute? I'm really curious to get people's thoughts and experiences.
Yeah, I just have a question just from my own experience, just trying to understand, how do we find a good balance? Like, I love that example you shared with the example in Germany, right? You being from the UK of, you took something as, could be interpreted as rude or too harsh, or I'm personally from the South here in the United States. So we're very, very, very sweet. We're very nice, and to a fault maybe at some points. But how do you find that if you're working with a team that's so different from you, how do you make sure you're meeting with them and trying to adapt to their cultural differences, but not really losing yourself and your own sort of values in that process?
Yeah. So I think this is about really the self-awareness piece. So understanding where you do have very strong preferences, understanding what is really important to you, and then recognizing when you're activated. And what I mean is you're sitting in a meeting and you're like, ooh, that doesn't feel so comfortable for me. Like this does not kind of sit right. Or you're taking a negative point of view of something that's been said because of the way it's being said or the way it's being presented to you. It's about that pause button and then taking a moment to work out, okay, why is this activating me so much? What's going on here? Now, clearly, that takes practice. And if we have time, we can reflect, we can go away from the situation and come back again. The real skill is that as we build up our muscles in our cultural intelligence, that we get quicker in this, that we get quicker to respond rather than react to the situations that are presented to us. And it's a journey. So look, even as somebody who is a coach and a trainer in this, I cannot sit here and say, I am perfect at this. Like that would be really inauthentic of me. Equally, I cannot say that I know and familiar with every culture in the world, and neither should I be, right? That's not my role. But the role of all of us on this journey is to get better at this, to develop our cultural intelligence muscles so we get better at responding than reacting to what's coming up, and then learning from it and adjusting ourselves as we go along.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah.
No
May I just
problem.
add to Victoria's point as well, that they respond, not react, I try to practice this myself as well, is try to separate the message from how it's being delivered. So I think that can be also applied when people give feedback cross-cultural. So that's also very helpful to separate the message from how it's being delivered. Yeah,
I love that. That's a really great advice.
not always easy, like Victoria said. It can be really, you can really get your heart going, but you just try your best.
Yeah, I think that's a really great ad. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Fantastic. Any other ads at all?
Victoria, we have Amy Hannon in the chat. She
Oh,
has a
sorry, I
question.
missed that. Okay, cool.
So how can we advocate for the significance of cultural intelligence and implementing strategies to address cultural nuances effectively when enterprise level organizations struggle to grasp its importance, especially in the leadership level?
Okay, that's a brilliant question, Emmy. And I'm curious, perhaps, I don't know if you feel comfortable, but I'm curious whether this is a personal question or not. But what I would say is there is lots of research in this area that talks about why it's important and the impacts when organizations do not get this right. And I can certainly share, I mentioned some of the stats right at the beginning, but I can share some of that research with you. And certainly, if this is a personal challenge you're facing, I'm really happy to pick up the conversation and talk about it, because this absolutely is fundamental. Like, doing global business is going to be challenging if you're going to be truly crossing different regions, crossing different cultures, if people are not aware of this, if people are not trained in this. And at sort of best, it might lead to some potential missteps or potential like miscommunications where people have to repeat information, repeat meetings just to make sure everything is clear because something didn't quite land. At worst, I've seen it lead to some really quite serious conflict in teams where people really genuinely feel they other the other group. They kind of say, look, they're deliberately doing this. They are got negative intent, and this is becoming a massive issue. And that damages reputations. It slows down business delivery. It puts at risk global projects. I mean, for me, that's commercial risk. It's not just, this is not a nice to have. So if you need some statistics on that, if you want to pick up a conversation, just let me know. I'm here. Okay. Hope that helps you, Emmy. Great. Any other shares? Anything else anybody wants to ask? Because this is a really great conversation. I love having all the contributions.
Yeah,
I have.
Oh, go ahead,
Go,
Susan.
no, go ahead. Go ahead, Sarah, please.
I was saying one more question. You said you can't possibly research and know everything about every culture, right? Every group that you're meeting with. But could you give advice if you're going to meet with a completely different culture, a different country? Could you give advice of like what are some research tools and tips to get to prepare for that meeting?
Absolutely. And I look, there are so many different ways you can do that. So yes, there are culture maps that will have a aggregated research that says, generally speaking, people from the UK are kind of like this. And yes, that is helpful, but I want you to always treat that as a starting point, because what version, even in the tiny country that is the UK, which is actually relatively a small country, which version of the UK are we talking about? You talked earlier about coming from the south of the States, right? That's a really different version of the US from, say, East Coast or West Coast, or which, and I don't know all the different versions. So this is the really interesting thing. Like the research, like we can definitely research and get ideas from the academic research that's out there that's very well founded about the averages. But then we have to recognize this is our starting point. And then we need to observe the humans that we're working with and work out, okay, are they showing up in this way? Or is there something slightly different going on here? Is there something else that's adding to the mix? So if I give you a really interesting example, at one point I was working a lot with Japanese clients. And again, I made myself very well informed about what might be important about working with people who were based in Japan or were from Japan originally, but living in the UK. And what was very interesting about that was one of the kind of key values that I got interested in was about the idea of expressiveness. So what I generally observed was that for most people who had Japanese cultural identity was that they weren't as expressive as people in the UK I'd experienced, generally speaking. However, I worked with one or two people who were incredibly expressive and were Japanese. And so this is the really important point. The the idea of cultural intelligence is not to put people in boxes and say, you are like this because the research says you're like this. We use the research intelligently and say, this is a starting point to help inform me. And then let's have a look at who we are dealing with here. Who is this person? And how do I understand the best way to connect with them?
Gotcha. Thank you. That's really helpful. Yeah. It's just starting with the averages, getting a high level idea, but then getting to that one-to-one individual level. Awesome.
That's right. And that's why this is about cultural intelligence rather than just awareness or sensitivity, cultural sensitivity. We've got to go deeper.
Gotcha. Thank you.
No problem.
Victoria, before we wrap up, I have a question and I have a comment. So I'm going to leave the comment for the wrap up. The question is, how does generations interact with cultural intelligence? Meaning, like, when I see cultures, I see like vertical layers, but then there's generation layers when it comes to like baby boomers, Gen Xers, millennials. Is there anything there in the cultural intelligence material that we can use as a reference, or because it's not the same, like let's say you have a baby boomer from the UK that needs to interact with a manager who's a millennial in Brazil. I see a lot of things changing and a lot of different things going on there. So what's your experience with that?
This is so important. Thank you so much for raising this. So I made the focus for today more about our national cultural identity. But what you're asking about, which is so critical, is about our intersectionality of our identities. So the fact that I live in London, I consider myself a Londoner as well as from the UK. The fact that I'm a woman, the fact that I'm from the generation that I am, the fact that I have worked in corporate as well as running my own business. There are so many influences in who we are. Now, I would say that, yes, of course, there's research about different generations and so on. But of course, we're also really busy global professionals. So we are not academics. We cannot learn all the research about all the different aspects of one person's identity. But what's really important, the point you raised there, is cultural intelligence raises your eyes up to the horizon. You look up and you see, actually, I need to look at the full picture here of this person. Like, why are they showing up the way they do? What influences the way they are? And that could be generational. It could be about the team they're working in, the way that somebody shows up who works in marketing could be really different from the person who's working in supply chain, for example, taking a really extreme, like a little bit of an example there. So that we have all these cultural influences all around us from different aspects of our identity. So I'm really glad you raised this final question. So thank you for that.
Yeah, sure. No, and there's different, like medical doctors, that's a whole different world. So I happen to have my family, a couple of family members in that. And so when you talk to them, it's like a different culture. So,
Yeah.
but then my comment is more like a testimonial, because I've been part of your trainings before. I recently was in the middle of a miscommunication between two members, and I was helping an English speaking member to connect with someone from a non English speaking country, and that other person wanted to interact by text because she didn't feel confident with her English. But she didn't specify that to the English speaking member, and so the English speaking member was mad because she wanted to do business, and for business she felt like they needed to jump into Zoom and talk at least for the first time. When I explained to the English speaker member, she said, "Well, that other person, she never told me about a lack of confidence, but that's because of you don't want to lose face by saying that you have a lack of confidence." So I have to interact there, and I help there a little bit, even with a little bit of translation. But that was an interesting case where I kind of implemented a little bit of what I learned through you, and I just wanted to bring this up. So it's something that happens day to day, and I want to think there's missing opportunities because of these type of things. So as you said, it's not a nice to have. It is something that companies, but also individuals and professionals, should definitely bear in mind.
Thank you so much for that feedback and testimonial. That means a lot to me. And I am really, pleased to hear of that real life example where you were able to come in and be that cultural bridge to bring people together who were absolutely had the same agenda, but just miscommunicating or misunderstanding what was going on in the situation. So that's a really brilliant example. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. And thank you, Victoria, for your time today. Any last words, or if anyone has any last comment, feel
No,
free to
I mean, briefly from me, thank you so much. I know we were like a small group, but I love that. I love the conversation, love the bills, the questions. You know, for me, this is always what it's about. You know, I think we are a global tribe. And so this is such a brilliant topic for us to be talking about. So yeah, from me, any further questions, anybody wants to do their own cultural intelligence assessment for the special price, give me a shout, just find me on LinkedIn. But thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciated it.
excellent. Thank you, Victoria. And we'll be gonna be sharing the recording, and a shout out to Victoria with the opportunity for Global Chamber members this month as well.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
everyone.
Thank
Really
you, everyone.
appreciate
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.